So thank you all for joining us. We've got some great speakers today we're really excited to have with us. My name is Chris McCahill. I'm the Managing Director of the State Smart Transportation Initiative, or SSTI. And we've also got Megan Link from our staff here helping behind the scenes. So while folks join, we're just going to kick things off with a poll. So please stand by while that hopefully pops up. So this is just a quick little poll so we can understand who's with us today. So feel free to let us know where you are and what your background is. While you're doing that, I'm going to run through a few housekeeping items. First of all, today's webinar is being recorded, and that should be available at our website, SSTI, probably tomorrow, if not later this week. We're going to be saving time at the end for questions. So if you have questions, type them in to the Q&A box at any time, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. So I think if we've gotten some responses to the polls, we can take a look at who we've got with us today. So pretty good spread of folks all across the country. That's great to see. And is that the only question we asked? I think that might be. Great. So I'm glad everyone here. Before we jump into today's speakers, I'd just like to give everyone a little background about our group. SSTI is the State Smart Transportation Initiative. It's a project of Smart Growth America and the High Road Strategy Center at the University of Wisconsin in Madison, where we're based. Our mission is to support state DOTs in advancing equity and sustainability while maintaining high standards of governmental transparency. We do this in three main ways. The first is through convening. So we host an annual community of practice for DOT leaders each year so they can share challenges and best practices. We also host various peer learning networks for agency staff. The second is through building capacity. This is mainly through applied research and technical assistance where we work directly with state DOTs. And the third is through knowledge sharing. So this typically focuses on the latest research and best practices, which we share through webinars like this one, along with our bi-weekly blog and newsletter, which you can sign up for at our website, ssti.us. So before I hand things over to our speakers, just wanted to say I'm really looking forward to hearing about today's topic. I first learned about this topic in conversations with folks from the Ray, in which I learned that our friends at the Minnesota DOT are pioneering some really innovative thinking in helping the green transition, basically. So we know that state DOTs are playing an important role in supporting vehicle electrification. That's mainly through the NEVI program. I didn't realize the challenges of running transmission lines, fiber optics, and other utilities along existing highways. It seems like an obvious opportunity for helping to build, a more resilient grid, and eventually allowing us to modernize our highways for connected vehicles and other technologies. So it'll be great for us to hear today some of those challenges and how some states are starting to tackle them. So with that, I don't want to take any more time from our speakers, so I think I will turn it over. And I think Sherry is going to go first. So Sherry, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sherry Pfeiffer. I'm the Central U.S. Regional Manager for the Ray. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to cover right-of-way transmission and some unique partnerships we've had with the Minnesota DOT as well as some others. Next slide, please. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Array, we are a nonprofit organization that focuses on sustainability, safety, and zero deaths on our highways. One of the primary programs at the Ray centers around transportation and the energy nexus. So, as we continue to look at electrifying transportation and the economy as a whole, we really need to think about modernizing our energy infrastructure to deliver a lot more power to meet the demand of the transportation sector. The grid's underpowered and underprepared for electrification of transportation, and we can't onboard more renewable generation without overpowering its limited capacity. So, as we modernize our grid, we have the opportunity to power it with renewable energy and to charge EVs with cost effective clean energy. And we can accomplish this in part by making the most of the publicly owned highway system. Uh, One, we can use public land along the roadsides to build and generate renewable energy systems, use the energy to charge electric vehicles, both wired and wirelessly, and use these roadsides to build a national high voltage direct current transmission grid. Next slide. So, like I said, new transmission is needed. The electric highways study by the National Grid projects that large truck stops are going to require about the same amount of power as a small town or a large industrial plant to charge the number of trucks that will be on the roadway in the future. So consider that some of these truck stops are going to be located in remote and rural areas where the electric grid might be built for only servicing a handful of homes. So we really need to be innovative and intentional about where we place things, uh, how we get power in the ground, and then also about our sustainable electricity. Next slide. We also need to think about decarbonization. Transportation decarbonization doesn't happen without grid decarbonization. We're going to need 2 to 5 times more transmission by 2050. Next slide, please. And there's a lot of barriers to this transmission. One of them is going to be siting. Siting can take almost a decade. If you really think about it when you're doing even like a home project. You contact your county or your city, you need to get permits. We all know sometimes that can take a great deal of time that you don't have. There can be community opposition to new projects, whether it be, for environmental purposes. They don't want you to dig there because it might be an aquifer or protected land. There's also renewable energy needs that high capacity transmission for the macro grid. So this can take up to a decade and it can even stop the project completely. So this is why we need to plan for now. So often in transportation, we find ourselves playing the catch up game. So it's really important that we look at this and think about how to plan effectively and appropriately to address these needs. Next slide. This is where transportation comes in. So this is where we can help by thinking about how can transportation and energy providers work together. So at the DOT, there's right of way, and that is where the land meets the edge of the highway. So if you think about where you see all those power lines, that land is owned by your local, all of the DOTs, and that's often where transmission is sited. So Wisconsin DOT cited transmission in interstate and highway right of way. Italy and France have also worked together to site buried HVDC transmission in their highway right of way. Now, is this something that currently occurs all over the place? It doesn't. Like so many businesses, it's it's hard to always get the right people at the table. You know, we don't always have enough people staffed to get all these things done, especially when it has extra cost involved. Next slide. Uh, you also need to do the buried HVDC lines and expect 20 feet of right of way. So why is it important to bury these? It's capable of moving a lot of power very far. So thousands of gigawatts for thousands of miles is going to connect to areas of the country that have the greatest renewable resources to major load centers. So burying these lines eliminates a lot of those safety issues and impacts, and it increases the resiliency to extreme weather events like fires, hurricanes, tornadoes. Um, Thinking about some of the recent weather events, just even in Texas, where I'm from, there was a tornado in Houston just the other day, and so many people are without power still just because of that. Next slide. The other important thing is co-locating it with fiber. And I can't stress this enough. When you're digging for a new project, I myself am former DOT, so this was a conversation we started having a lot, is dig once. If you're going to dig and there's no fiber, you might as well do it while you're down there, because you don't need to do it again. If you've got the hole done, do it. This is going to help you to get ITS systems done, allow for resource sharing, also allowing you to really get some of those connected and automated vehicle systems up. That can help you so much with safety improvements. I've heard from some DOT partners that they now have this and they're able to find out about any sort of issues with the roadway in less than 90 seconds sometimes, because they're connected. Whereas before, it may have taken 15 minutes for them to find out about a hazard in the roadway. So, really, just something to think about. Next slide. I'm going to be handing it off to Jessica O with the Minnesota DOT, where she's going to put more application to what I've been talking about and why it's important to prepare for this.
Thank you so much, Sherry. It's such a pleasure to be here today. Thank you so much for SSTI for hosting us for this discussion. It's been an exciting journey over the last few years as we've evaluated and worked really closely with Array as a key partner to evaluate all the economic and technical and various feasibility considerations around siting, transmission, and highway rights of way. So we released a report a few years ago in partnership with Array and our partners with the Next Gen Coalition to really share our analysis and a deep dive of what are the opportunities and what are the constraints, and really what's the skin in the game for the average DOT. So today we're going to deep dive, and I'll share that 3.5-year journey that we've been on to enable this infrastructure on our rights of way. So next slides. Keep it going. My name is Jessica O. I am the Strategic Partnerships Director with the Minnesota Department of Transportation. I'm part of an office that focuses on sustainability and public health and many intersecting areas that support decarbonization. And we were very pleased to have these thought leaders on the national level approach MnDOT and help us really understand what's at stake for energy and what are these various needs. And so in order to do this, we had at the time a Sustainable Transportation Advisory Council that was helping advise MnDOT on our strategies and how they're intersecting. And they encouraged us to analyze this concept of co-location of transmission infrastructure with communication infrastructure and how it connects to our electrified future. And so, they were able to bring significant resources to bear from philanthropy to help us analyze this, to help us learn, to really understand what are the barriers, how can we overcome them, how can we ensure that we're bringing all of our sister agencies to the table, how do we analyze risk, how do we understand various perspectives internally and externally, and really make sure that we're connecting all the dots. And as part of that journey, we connected with our Public Utility Commission that really asked us to not just evaluate the opportunity for buried high voltage transmission, which is, I think, the future, but certainly to also evaluate just standard above ground transmission. So as we're talking about this topic, we're contemplating really both, and I think DOT should understand the implications of both. So next slide. So looks like we're missing a little bit of my box there, but if you could see it, you'd see that what's driving this need that Sherry referenced is that the grid needs to be upgraded, and increasing the capacity of our grid 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 times in the next 20 or 30 years is a massive undertaking. And between the Inflation Reduction Act and IIJA, we are really mobilizing to connect the dots in these various areas. And long sighting of transmission is a major barrier to realizing our renewable energy future. And so this, ridiculous, I say that with love in my heart, but this ridiculous chart sort of shows this very, very long journey. And as we started to have these conversations, what we realized that most in transportation, we're not energy professionals. We don't understand the critical issues of the grid. We didn't understand all those elements, and we were just starting to scratch the surface with electrification and with adoption of NEVI. And so we had to learn all the lingo. We had to understand the needs. We had to understand all the players. And it literally took us 1.5 years to reflect on what are their timelines? What are their business models? We don't even speak the same language. And in some instances, as you all are aware, we have challenging relationships with utilities to preserve our needs while also, doing high impact utility accommodation for the, public good. So it was a long journey, but we couldn't have done it without our partners with Array, and it really helped us dive deeper to connect the dots. So next slide. So when we were really spent quite a bit of time trying to understand what's at stake for transportation, we had some challenging conversations internally where folks are like, is this allowing transmission so that we can plug those transmission lines into NEVI charging stations? We were trying to understand really what's the there with this added infrastructure. I think we can all agree that adding additional infrastructure complicates our work. And, we have deep concerns around what that means for our future and how we utilize rights of way. But first and foremost, since we are, of course, transportation is disproportionately contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, and we are a sector that is trying to mobilize to address these needs, to stave off the worst impacts of greenhouse gas emissions and climate impacts, that we do have a stake in this game. And use of our rights of way, our precious rights of way, is a way to be part of that solution so that we can have clean energy powering those electric vehicles into the future. And in Minnesota, in our specific context, we had some boosts during the process. So in our 23 legislative session, our legislature mandated that all electricity must come from renewable energy sources by 2040. So that kind of lit a fire for us of really how these pieces are connected, and helping us deeply understand that use of our rights of way can be part of the solution for the siting of the transmission. So if you can picture it in the simplest of terms, when you have new solar farms, new wind farms, those resources have to be connected to the grid. And so in order to do that, we need more transmission, and we need a lot more of it. And how they site these transmission projects is a big problem for our nation and a barrier. And so we can be part of this solution. So we view that use of our rights of way can support our shared decarbonization goals in both energy and in transportation. Next slide. So if you're not aware, or if you're not an energy weirdo wonk like some of us on this call, you might not be aware that this build out is already in process. So there are regional transmission operators that oversee the grid in different regional sections of the country, and even here in the Midwest, we have MISO. And in the last few years, they have released what they're calling tranches of new transmission to be sited, and it's here. And so these projects are in planning and in development, and they have arrived. So this isn't a long off future. This isn't 30 years out. This is now. So as we seek to be a partner in decarbonization, there's so much opportunity for us to be part of this solution. So next slide. So how did we do this? Well, we started by activating our partners internally to really try to deeply understand what's at stake for all of our different resources and to bring everyone along. So that included our environmental interests, our ITS and TISMO, our state fiber assets, our connected autonomous vehicle office, our maintenance, our operations, a huge range of those different folks to help us understand all the dimensions of what this could mean to allow this added infrastructure in our rights of way. And so we knew we couldn't do that without the expertise of the partners who are here today, but also our local FHWA division office was part of our analysis, as was our Department of Commerce that houses our state energy office and all of our energy activities, and of course our Public Utility Commission. So they joined this effort from the moment go of trying to figure out what does this mean and what is coming and what are the pressure points for us. Next slide. So as part of this journey, we were releasing our statewide multimodal transportation plan. That is our highest level policy plan. And we were really evaluating how these use of our rights of way can support the reduction of carbon emissions and this decarbonization journey. So we were able to contemplate within our formal long range plans and our other short-term elements and our utility accommodation manual and all those various pieces. We sought to go deep within the policy sort of realm, the planning realm, all the connecting of all the dots with the partners. And we were able to prioritize how we use our right of way, that this is a critical element for our shared future. Next slide. So what did we learn during this journey? Well, I like to reference and play the clip from, I don't know if we have any Parks and Recs fans here, but if you're familiar with Leslie Knope, there's a clip where she talks about public engagement and how it is people caring loudly at her. And this journey of analyzing added transmission infrastructure was some of our engineers caring loudly at me, which I really appreciated their passion for the concern for what this really does mean for us, because there are massive implications for how we deliver the transportation system. So what we came away with was a basket of critical issues that we would encourage other DOTs who might be interested in pursuing these elements to analyze. As part of that, first and foremost, as you all are aware, that the field of right of way, it's antithetical to suggest adding infrastructure that would future our ability to use our own right of way for transportation purposes. So that is always first and foremost in Title 23 a concern for how those pieces intersect and what that would mean for our transportation future. And during the journey, first and foremost, we live and die by safety. Safety is our North Star. It is our primary value, and everything that we do that could challenge our safety vision is disconcerting to us, as it should be. And so adding this infrastructure does add more risk. And we wanted to understand, is it really about the poles and crash risk? Is it about construction risk, employee risk? We dove deep into some of those various areas to understand the dimensions of safety and ensure that we have the right controls in place, which is, can be quite complicated. We were concerned about, will this infrastructure, add delays to our projects for that coordination? We were concerned about the costs that we will bear as a result of hosting this infrastructure. Every state has different legislative and sort of policy statutory pictures as terms of what it really means for this. But in Minnesota at the time, and still, we have no authority we have a no fee permitting vision in our state. So for the cost that we will bear. So for instance, when the infrastructure goes in, we might have to relocate our state fiber. We might have to relocate ITS infrastructure. There will be impacts, and we have no authority to leverage fees as part of that within utility accommodation. So that was concerning to us, and it continues to be, but we're going to keep a close eye on that going forward. And we also were worried about also the costs of what happens if we need for these poles to move, quite honestly. We tried to have a strong eye to long range planning and what those pieces mean, but we were concerned for what happens when those poles have to move, and we don't want to bear the cost of moving those poles if we need that right of way for critical transportation projects. So that was a concern for us, especially based on our specific policy situation in Minnesota. First, we care very deeply about our scenic byways and those wonderful, beautiful view sheds that we spend so much time caring about in the work that we do, and our environmentally sensitive roadsides, whether that's cultural resources or endangered species. The impact to the environmental sort of picture within our rights of way is deeply concerning to us. And when you're coordinating on environmental considerations with other agencies, you want to make sure that our vision for that is being observed and is being respected throughout the process. So that was, that's concerning to us. And similar to that, the average project or project that was shared in Wisconsin that we learned a lot from during this process, they've had transmission in rights of way and interstate rights of way for 20 years. So, we've during this journey learned quite a bit from our sister state in Wisconsin, that they had a project that removed 45,000 trees. And so, as you can imagine, as you all know, you want to move 1 or 2 trees as part of a transportation project, and you've got everyone's up in arms, and it's very disconcerting. So the vegetation removal, whether you can charge for that vegetation removal, then use that to invest in other projects, that's very real. And we know that vegetation serves critical purposes in communities, from carbon capture to economic value, all of it, the whole piece, that's a concern. So that was an area that we were worried about. And then finally, there's an unknown in coordinating with other state agencies. It increases complexity. And we started out with relationships that weren't, they were there, but we needed even stronger relationships to be able to make sure that our transportation needs and our engineering viewpoint and these other elements were being respected in the process. And so there was a little unknown there as we entered into this journey. Next slide. So as we came away, I like to say this lovingly, that we really didn't understand a lot of the energy perspectives, and everyone says, of course you can use that right away. It's big, open, wide spaces. You see these, grassy, rural rights of way, and everyone thinks, well, why couldn't you? There's nothing happening there. Why wouldn't you put infrastructure there? But that, of course, as you all know, as DOT professionals, that the average roadside has literally dozens of uses that are not, apparent to the untrained eye, how we're using it for conveyance of water, and the importance of ditches for habitat, all the things that we know that are critical. So we had to help educate them around that and around what our barriers are and what our pressure points are. But fundamentally, I think we can all agree and understand that use of our rights of way does preserve other greenfield land uses. It helps protect our beautiful natural resources and productive agricultural acreage, which is very critical to our economy and our futures. It can help reduce, potentially for those other, clear new cut projects, it can help reduce impacts to the environment and culturally sensitive areas. It can help reduce public opposition. Folks say, well, of course you'd put this infrastructure in DOT. It's already ugly. Put other ugly infrastructure with it. There was this sort of attitude in the public sometimes about that. And, we don't feel that way. We have a lot of pride around, what we do for visual quality and how we care deeply about those issues and what we consider previously disturbed lands versus other perspectives on that. So there were some debates, and there are ongoing debates in our field about all of these various areas and our rights of way. But ultimately, we can reduce visual impact of energy infrastructure by utilizing our right of way. But the fundamentally, I think what is one of the most compelling points for us to contemplate as transportation professionals of why this really matters is that if use of our rights of way can speed those, dealing with one landowner and reducing those permitting times can help us get to decarbonization faster, we're ultimately, that's going to save ratepayers money. It's going to help with our goals, but it's going to save ratepayers money. And I think we need to care about that. And it does matter to our states and to the people that we serve. So if this can be realized, there could be cost savings along the way. And so in Minnesota also, we need to look at all options are on the table, all hands, in order to meet our clean energy mandate. So it really requires us to think creatively and to figure out how to walk and chew gum at the same time as we evaluate this added infrastructure. Next slide. So as part of this, MnDOT is part of the AASHTO Moonshot. So if those of you that are not familiar, AASHTO for the last few years has been, taking a step back and evaluating what are our aspirational goals in transportation. And this concept of the going to the moon, what massive fundamental shifts are occurring. We're in a period of great disruption and great change and great opportunity. And this effort really helps us evaluate that. And so if you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to do a deep dive, but Minnesota is part of an initial 11 states that are part of the initial deployment pilot kind of activities, and we're part of that clean fueling and powering. And they're challenging us to embrace this concept of a moonshot, where we don't do incremental change, where it's just a little bit better, that we consider things that are radical solutions to complex problems. And this is a radical solution to a complex problem. I think in transportation, this might sound like a lot of hyperbole, but I'll stand by it, that we're being called upon to, in transportation, to understand all of our nation's pressing needs and how we can help serve those, and utilizing our precious rights of way that is not an infinite resource, is one way to understand that. It's a way to understand that for energy. It's a way to understand that for the affordable housing crisis and unsheltered people. It's a way to understand lots of areas where our land is a precious resource that can be leveraged for community good in different ways. Is it make it more complicated? Yes. Is it the right thing to do? Also, yes. Public lands for public good is something that I encourage us to embrace as right-of-way professionals. Next slide. I really got on my soapbox there for a minute. Hopefully SSTI will give me a hook if needed, but I can't resist the opportunity to have the microphone to share what I see as a critical opportunity for us as we build a different future in transportation. So as part of this, our goal is to expand how we use these rights of way to support the clean energy transition. And we want to encourage everyone, as part of it, as we are doing, to understand that all right-of-way is not the same, and that co-location, when we reference, so we also don't have a common language with this. So even with my partners in energy and as we speak to our partners in the feds and other states, we don't all speak about this the same way, but I would encourage for us to contemplate how we can get to a shared language. But in general, co-location of actual occupancy of the right-of-way is different from the issues that we often already deal with. So most of us are already familiar with utility accommodation, with paralleling, where we have, and I see a wee typo there, aerial encroachment, right? We're used to that, where these projects are right outside of our right-of-way, and the considerations for aerial encroachment is different than occupancy, obviously. Captain Obvious reporting for duty here, but truly, while those aerial encroachment and paralleling offer significant value for reduction of land that's purchased for those projects, it supports projects very directly, very positive. Co-location offers even more benefits, and then most DOTs already have quite a bit of experience with crossing. So as you evaluate, contemplate this, you're building upon what you already do in many instances. Next slide. So MnDOT's approach with this, in order to realize this future, we've had, lots of legislative action around this. Every legislative session for the past few has looked at permitting reform, opportunities, and what we see as this next chapter, as most of the statutes have been shifted the last two sessions to really mandate that we will host some of this infrastructure. So that's part of it. There's a strong stick there. But in general, we need to think more broadly about how do we shift the culture around how we work together, how we do that early. And we see that new resources for early coordination really help us preserve our transportation needs. And we learned that from our friends in Wisconsin, that early coordination is the key to smoother projects. And we see that a shared focus on safety is also critical to that. And so we're looking at new resources and new coordination to make sure that we are continually refreshing those areas that are of critical importance to us. We also want to eventually put together some joint trainings. We think that if we could train transmission developers to understand our constraints better with our sister agencies, everybody would have better projects that would be proposed that understand where we would say, have to jog out here, can't be here, projects coming here, all those various elements. We think that we could get more proactive around that by singing from the same songbook. And it's not just MnDOT, it's other downstream permitting agencies, which include like our Department of Natural Resources and others. So we see opportunity there. As part of this, we have to, bring everybody along. So we're going to be doing district tours and listening sessions where we look at projects we've already allowed, we reflect how it's impacted our maintenance and operations, and really have a two-way street of communication to understand deeply that the policy has shifted. We are now allowing this, and what does it mean? And do we need to tighten up any controls to make sure that we're prepared for this? And we need more staff to do that. This takes more staff, really put a strain on us. And we want to make sure that we do have those controls where we have things like MOUs with our sister agencies, again, to preserve our engineering viewpoint and respect those go or no go moments as we host this infrastructure. Next slide. So as part of this, our Office of Land Management and our utility division has spent a great amount of time developing new resources to better coordinate. And they've done an outstanding job of creating new guidance around this infrastructure. And it's really gone a long way towards us reinforcing what those constraints are in order to hopefully have better projects be proposed. So, we want to get proactive in what that looks like. Encourage you to go check out our resources in our portal there as part of our land management office. Next slide. As part of that, we also realized that our environmental folks wanted to have a stronger role as well on the front end during that early coordination process. And so they've created a new early notification memo that was building on an existing E&M process, but was a chance to hone in on things that could be specific to transmission infrastructure and energy infrastructure. So it really helps in our process around routing of these projects to have everyone weigh in, and it kind of goes formally through all of our functional groups. It just allows a smoother process, and for us to be able to say, there's a endangered species habitat here, there's every bit along the way we can identify where there are issues early, and this process helps us get there sooner. Next slide. So as a result of all of this, the last few years, especially in the last year and a half or so, we've seen new projects being proposed. It's increasing and it's stretching our capacity, but the floodgates have opened and we are at the table being a partner with these projects. So, it's increased exponentially, and we hope that we'll, continue to have important relationships with both sister agencies and with industry, both public utilities and private renewable energy developers who are part of the picture for many states. Next slide. So a big project that's coming down the pike, the challenge for us too is when routes haven't been decided. We want early information and we want specific information. This has been a pressure point with utilities in the past. And as you can contemplate this infrastructure, I would encourage you to think through this, that when there are many routing options, we can do analysis, but when there's dozens of them, it's a challenge. So we want actual pole placement locations. We want to get really specific really quickly. And, with our permitting process with our Public Utilities Commission, that's not always how it goes down. So we're trying to figure out what that means. But these new projects that are being proposed have every little bit of it: co-location, paralleling, and crossing. So as we think about their use of our trunk highways and the rest, we're challenged to coordinate earlier and more intensively with these folks. Next slide. So just in my last few slides, just sharing a few lessons learned through this process. Our cherished colleagues in Wisconsin, we've learned a lot from the utility engineer, Bob Fasek in Wisconsin, who recently said, when MnDOT's done moonshotting, Wisconsin will be at the other side with cheese curds, which I personally loved, but we learned a lot from them. They require what's called a constructability report. It speaks to all of the DOT's needs in that early coordination period of everything from traffic control and sort of all kinds of really detailed DOT specific constraints are addressed in these constructability reports. Our legislature literally just ended 2 days ago, and they passed a statute that requires that constructability reports must be submitted to Minnesota. So we're adopting that practice. They also have structure in Wisconsin for significant occupancy fees. We have none. So as you can consider that, you will have costs that you incur as a result of these projects. Figure out how that you're funding that, where those are getting paid for. And they have a different statutory picture, but having utilities pay for pole relocations as the price of entry of use of our right of way is a good thing. And then they had lots of lessons learned around the vegetation piece, the fencing being blown out, proactively understanding that the issues that we often sometimes have with utilities in general are also present here. So as you think about your controls, those cause us a lot of heartburn. So if you can be proactive in any of those, it's helpful. And then the grounding issue, you will have to do additional grounding and it's going to cost money. And so, again, learned quite a bit from Wisconsin. But things that really worked in this journey for us that I would encourage if you're contemplating this is really around, having external partners such as the Ray. We had no energy expertise. And so we needed, and it was very helpful to have their expertise and voice as part of this. We needed new staff. We needed to have everyone at the table. We did listening sessions with the utilities and the developers to really talk about, do you want to use a right of way? What does it mean for you? What are questions you have? We did listening sessions that really helped us sharpen the issues from their perspective as we built our partnership up. And we wanted to make sure everybody at MnDOT was represented in some way. Not everybody is happy about these changes, but their concerns deserve to be aired and deserve to have their expertise in helping make sure that we're protecting our interests. So important lesson learned. Next slide. So as we wrap up here, there is significant cultural resistance. I think we can all agree that adding this infrastructure right away is hard for us, and that as we move through our large bureaucracies, it's a challenge, and this will continue to be a challenge. But I encourage for you to invest in your staff and invest in your relationships with your sister agencies. It'll go a long way. And as those people cycle through, keep establishing those relationships to make sure that a DOT's interests are being represented. So with that, thanks for the opportunity to share a little bit about our journey. Always happy to consult with folks individually, but thank you for SSTI for including us in this discussion. I'll pass it back to Sherry to talk about a really important tools that they have that can support the analysis and your efforts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica. So I'm going to focus today on our right-of-way transmission tool. Here at the Ray, we've got a couple tools in our belt, so to speak. We also have a solar analysis tool that really focuses on the feasibility and where we could put solar in the right-of-way. And this right-of-way transmission tool is what I'm going to focus more so on today. So this tool, it's got a variety of capabilities to create 3 phases of use. It requires quite a bit of intensive data sets, but it creates possibilities for transmissions planning on multiple scales. The tool's ability to route projects on a state scale and aid in cost projections and scale to model detail are very valuable. So there's not a lot of exclusions because most situations really can be designed around. But that list there, I'm not going to read through it for you, but is what would be the information we need for data. And the 3 phases of use would be siting, costing, and modeling. Next slide, please. So the siting phase presents really kind of the greatest challenge. To touch on something Jessica said is not knowing where the route might go. So, as construction comes about, there's times where you have to change the pathway of a road. And so this is something you might need to think about. Siting runs at a statewide scale. So the combination of the road right of ways, that's a tongue twister, I'm sorry. The combination of the right of way for the roads that would best site transmission can be found in this phase. And one thing that we have found with even for our solar analysis is not all of the DOTs have their right of way fully mapped, especially in GIS. So this is something that can be a little bit challenging for us. So just something to consider, and not to mention, not all of the data is public. So this requires that partnership that Jessica was speaking to. Next slide. So digging a little bit more into that data for siting, you're going to want a variety of geospatial data. So, as it gets further into the gray, you can see that's harder to get. One thing I found from one of our DOT partners is looking at fiber in the right of way. You would think sometimes some of your larger cities, like, oh, yeah, there has to be fiber in that right of way. Sometimes there's not. If the roadway was built a long time ago, you may find that there's not fiber because they haven't dug in that right of way for years and years. So that's something to think about. But other data, like hydrology data, your bridge data, your pipeline data, those all change. I know, being from Texas, pipeline data, I always joke that if you look at our pipelines, it looks like a kindergartner sat there with a crayon and just scribbled all over the place because there's so many pipelines. So really looking at that. Also the geological data, the soil data, etc. Next slide. Now looking at that costing phase. So the costing phase is where you want to be able to look at the exact routes that best avoid those costly, boring situations. This is also done at that statewide scale. So this is something that, again, looking at that data and looking at it carefully, because you don't want to do something and run into a situation where you create an issue that's much larger for yourself that you're, one, not equipped or prepared to deal with. Like Jessica said, those of us at DOTs we are not energy experts. Those of us at the Ray, we are subject matter experts, but the real experts are lying in the energy industry. So that's why it's always important to have the right people at the table and really examining this and working in that collaborative partnership. Next slide. So the data for costing. So you want to look at the boring per foot, boring under road and water. Looking at the landscape of every state is very different. Looking at even Texas, you've got East Texas is a lot more forest and, rich with trees. And then you go out to West Texas and it's dry desert. So you've really got to be aware of what that geographical landscape looks like. Maintenance faults, trenching per foot. And then you want to look at that distance required between the bolts. Next slide. Then we go into kind of that 3D modeling phase. This is really time consuming, but it's a great way for us to detail for the DOTs out there and create a visualization for them to see how this fits into their right of way. And really see how that transmission line could be placed and if there would be any issues or challenges. Next slide. So the red box that you see here is the vegetation clear zone. It's a 50-foot by 15-meter vegetation clear zone. So just to kind of give you that idea, but this is a digital elevation model. And then below it, you can see where that transmission line is. Next slide. And that is actually it for my slides. So, just to close on that note, we wanted to really set this up so you could all see where planning in a DOT, a lot of times you experience where you're playing that catch-up game. And this is something where, I transitioned. I used to be at a DOT and I'm no longer there. Now, as a partner with the part of the Ray, it's trying to form those important and critical partnerships where you can work with a DOT and create those collaborations across, industry, across, and even across, your planning partners. So state, local, federal, and then bringing your planning partners together because every industry has to plan. And then even bringing in something like what we call that P4 model of the public, the private partnerships, and then bringing in that philanthropic side of things to really hone in on what's needed, what's necessary, and how to get the job done as best as possible. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. I was muted. Thanks, Sherry and Jessica. I'll have you both come back now for Q&A. So I'll remind folks that if you do have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box. I see we've been answering some in real time in the chat box. I might bring those up here. But before we jump into those, I've got a couple questions for you. So starting with Jessica. So you hit on, you made it pretty clear this takes a lot of new capacity, a lot of new skill sets. It's a lot of work. And you walk through some of the sort of big picture benefits that tackling this has. I'm wondering if you wanted to speak, I think you maybe had one bullet on this, but if you want to speak a little bit more to the benefits to the agency, maybe unexpected benefits of taking this on, whether it's, you hit on partnerships a little bit, synergies, efficiencies, why might an agency want to do this against all odds?
Yeah, that's a great question, Chris. I think that, we spent a lot of time evaluating that of why would we want to do this? Because it is a challenge. There's quite a bit of complexity here. I think that the one talking point I would give for folks as they're leaving this is that truly we can be part of the solution for, we cannot realize our electrified transportation future without an expanded grid. And so if we have that as part of our vision in order to support the transportation system of the future and our disproportionate role in emitting greenhouse gas emissions, then this is one way for us to be part of that solution. And it ultimately connects the dot. That is our skin in the game, that there's not a direct equal sign between a transmission projects and our NEVI future necessarily. There might be instances where that's true, but the electrification of transportation more broadly requires that these investments occur, and we can be part of that solution. That really I like to say our fates are intertwined. I really believe that they are in terms of decarbonization. So this is a way for us to be part of that solution.
Thanks. And on that note, if you ever are looking for a soapbox, you're always welcome here.
Yay! I will take you up on that.
Yeah. Sherry, question for you. So your group has clearly worked with plenty of folks as they get their feet wet. So I'm just wondering if you wanted to say a little bit more about what an agency that is just starting to think about this should know. And, if someone were to approach you, what would that look like? And, how could you help them out? What do they need to know coming into that?
It's not as scary as it seems. There's no requirements here. It's really just about it's informal, it's educational, and it's moving at your own comfort level. I always say it's kind of like there's some people who are ready to jump in and kind of like do the cannonball. And then there's some people who just kind of want to get their toe wet and just see what's out there and what's available. And that's the pace we move at. You know, a good example is if I have a state DOT partner who says, hey, my leadership's kind of wanting to explore solar or something like that. But at a political level, they're not ready. I'll say, let's do it just a small area, if it's a district, if it's a sub-regional district, and create a use case. It's something that they can look at and say, this is what it would mean. This is an example of how much, energy that could be created. Your carbon footprint could be reduced by this much. This is a simple presentation you can share. And then we can discuss next steps. It's not some high pressure, you have to do this. This is why, because this is a thing where everyone really has to just move at their own pace. You can't force this on people because then it won't get done.
Great.
Can I add to that, Chris?
Yeah,
Can I add to
absolutely.
just really
Please
quickly?
do.
So there's been thank you, Sherry, for that. I agree with that.
Mhm.
And I think that interestingly, I feel like many DOTs there are some states who are leading very aggressively in broadband deployment and really are connecting the dots between our autonomous vehicle future, pressing needs in communities that do not have the bandwidth to meet the economies of their future, to whether it's telehealth or school or whatever it might be, and even connecting all their own assets and the increase of what communication infrastructure is going to look like. So there are states like Arizona and Utah and Georgia and Maryland. I mean, there's just so many that are really unpacking that nut that is broadband. And so what I would encourage folks to understand is that some of the issues with transmission are adjacent to this. So if you've already gone down those paths and you appreciate the impact of what added broadband will do for your state and the massive impact for your economy and your people, then I would encourage for you to reflect on how transmission can be part of that. But the issues are very similar. And, we already have outstanding utility accommodation approaches. So this stuff can be incremental in those ways. And many folks have overcome the fear of solar, and have done small solar projects. So I think all these issues are connected, and there are different ways of sort of getting into this pool in a way that will support your state's goals.
Yeah, and I think just going back to the question I asked earlier, like state DOTs, their mission's getting bigger and bigger every day. They're more multimodal, dabbling in all kinds of utility work, and I think that just makes them more prepared and stronger moving forward. It's kind of a necessity. I saw in the chat box we had a question here. Jessica, I don't know if you wanted to say anything more about preserving Greenfield, and in case people didn't quite understand the connection.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a little bit obvious, but if we're not utilizing our rights of way for this added transmission, we're going to have to utilize state lands, state parks, state lands. We're going to have to utilize productive farmland, which, agriculture has very strong feelings about this renewable energy future and use of their land. So if we're not hosting it, it'll have to be taken somewhere. So if you care about those other uses and what they mean for your economy and for your beautiful state, then clear cutting massive new corridors is a huge impact to your state. So you have the opportunity to help those corridors not be added, not be created, and to reduce those impacts by hosting this infrastructure. So that's kind of in a roundabout way what I intended.
Yep. And of course, there's few other state lands that cut straight across the state. So there's that added benefit.
Yeah.
Okay, one last question that I saw in the box, a question about FERC, which I don't really know anything about, but if anybody wanted to speak to that, so that we have it in the recording, either of you want to jump in on that?
I would just say I think a lot of state energy offices are still interpreting the new FERC finding and rules and what permitting reform will mean for them. And I would encourage DOTs that are evaluating these topics to make sure that you're in close coordination with your state energy office to understand the impact of federal regulations and new laws in your own state.
Great, thanks. Before we wrap up, is there anything that either of you would like to add?
No,
perfect. Then we are right on time. Thanks again to both of you. This was really fascinating and something I hadn't thought about at all until talking to you. So really appreciate it. And I'm sure folks out there can reach out to either of you if they have questions or want to partner in any way. So with that, hope you all have a good one.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.